Hey folks, welcome to Roll of Law. Today's video is Problems with Puzzles, Part 2, and this one is players versus characters. The issue here is that puzzles are often a challenge for the players instead of a challenge for the characters, and this can be a substantial issue when there's a big difference between the abilities of the characters and the players. So you might have a 20 intelligence wizard being played by somebody who, well, if we use the whole knife drawer metaphor, might be a spatula. This is a bit of an issue because it's unlikely that this character is going to be able to solve a puzzle, even if they're super smart as a character, because the player can't solve the puzzle. And by the same token, you might have a barbarian with 8 intelligence who's being played by a genius. And they're probably going to be able to solve this puzzle, or at least much more likely to be able to solve it, just because the player is better. And this is a general problem that comes up in Dungeons & Dragons a lot, because typically physical stats are ones that we don't really expect people to demonstrate. You don't say, hey, if your really strong character is going to lift that rock, you need to go back and lift up my Buick. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And we allow people to just roll a Constitution saving throw. We're not like, hey man, for this con save, you're going to have to eat some of this ground beef that I left in the back of my car for a few days. None of that makes sense. But we do expect people to be smart when their characters are going to be smart, be wise when their characters are going to be wise, and often to be socially adept. And that can be a problem. So this is not limited to puzzles, but it tends to come up in a really big way. Because if you are playing that wizard because you're really looking forward to that, that being able to play the smartest person in the room, you're not going to be able to do that unless there's some help or some other ways to go about this. Another place where this comes up is when you've got people who just like puzzles. And I'm one of those people. I really like puzzles. I've seen a lot of them. I've sort of done a lot of that kind of thing. And so if you've got people who enjoy puzzles, they may well have seen the specific puzzles before, especially if you're using one of the classics, like the Tower of Hanoi puzzle or the Wolf Sheep Grain puzzle. Both of these are classics, but lots of people know them by heart. It's been a while since I've done a wolf sheep grain puzzle, but I can probably just rattle it off from memory. So if you don't know the setup here, you've got a farmer, he's got a boat, it can take one thing, and he's got to transport a wolf, a sheep, and grain across to the other side. Now the problem is that the wolf, if left alone with the sheep, will eat it, and the sheep, if left alone with the grain, will eat that, and the grain doesn't eat the wolf because it's not a mimic, and if it was, this wouldn't be a solvable problem. But basically, take the sheep across, you've left the wolf and the grain behind, that's fine. Leave the sheep, go back, take the wolf, drop the wolf off, pick up the sheep, drop that back, sheep gets dropped off at the starting point, you pick up the grain, cart it over, drop off the grain, you've now got wolf grain at the other side, go back, pick up the sheep, and everyone's across. Did that from memory. So this is a problem because maybe my character is not supposed to be able to do that from memory. Now, these are substantial issues and they're very difficult to overcome. There isn't really a good answer to any of these, but there's various answers that are varying degrees of okay or tolerable. And some methods to address this and the respective drawbacks, we're going to talk about those, but you should also note that none of these should be considered mandatory. These are only things to be used if you think that they're going to actually improve your game in some way. So the first solution is just live with it and to sort of acknowledge that the puzzle is kind of a challenge for the players. And I think we've already sort of talked about the problems with that. The advantage, it's the simplest solution, and it's also really common. Lots of games will do this, so I don't think anyone's going to fault you if that's how you approach it. It's just one of those things that happens at a table. Another approach is to reassign credit for the solution. Now, this one is tricky. The way it sort of goes is you get lots of people who can help solve this puzzle, or the players can, but you just decide ahead of time that the credit for solving the problem is going to go to the person who makes, or to the character where it makes the most sense that they'd solve it. So say the 20 intelligence wizard. In my last video, I used as an example the moment of Gandalf trying to solve the speak, friend, and enter puzzle. And in that scene, you've got the hobbits and the dwarves kind of standing around going, yep, we're not going to do this. And then later dealing with other problems. But at the table, the way this could be happening is the players of the various hobbits and dwarves and so forth might be throwing out answers. And everyone's agreed that in character, Gandalf is going to be the one working on this puzzle. He's going to be the one solving it. But everyone still gets to have a go. Now, in terms of advantages, you've got some in-game consistency, and you still get everyone at the table being able to participate. But you really do need player buy-in for this one, and not every table is going to have that buy-in. If people don't want that credit reassignment, this is a real recipe for unhappy players. So this is only really good at a table where everyone agrees that this is going to be how it works. It can feel somewhat artificial, like everyone knows that the guy who shouted that out isn't the wizard. So that can also add some artificiality to the moment, but it is a viable solution. It does work if that's where you want to go. So that's one option. Another option is just to skip the puzzle part entirely and use ability checks to solve it. Now, that turns the puzzle largely into a skill challenge, and there's nothing wrong with that, unless you've got players who really like puzzles and really wanted a puzzle, because at that point they might be disappointed. You've given the win probably to the person with the best check, and there are problems with how skill checks work in a lot of games when you've got multiple people. I'll do another video on that sometime, but this can be a solution. However, it can be a bit of an unsatisfying solution. So another possible approach to this is to give hints to one player. And so you tell the group as a whole the puzzle, and then you might take the person who's got, whose character is really smart and give them some additional hints so that they're ahead of the game and they can help solve the puzzle faster. Now, one problem is that once you've got that smart person who knows these like a couple of steps ahead, they're probably just going to explain that to the rest of the group. But at least it gives them the opportunity of role-playing out their smart character, solving part of the puzzle, and explaining that to the rest of the characters. So that is a benefit. The other way you can spin this is just to go really far on it. And I'll give an example here. I had a guy who was playing a wizard and was not super clever, but he really he really liked playing wizards because you get to throw a fireball at a group of goblins, and nothing made him happier than being able to knock down like 8 or more miniatures at a go. He really liked that. But he also approached me and said, hey, I don't really feel like I'm getting to play this smart wizard archetype at all. And I went, yeah, that's a problem. And I didn't really know how to solve it. So the way what I ended up doing was I made a really hard puzzle. I actually took an LSAT problem. So this is from the test you take to get into law school. And I filed off all the serial numbers, kept the underlying logic to it, and made it into a fantasy puzzle. Now, before the session, I explained to him what the solution was and how you derive the solution, like how the steps to get there. So before he encountered the puzzle, he already secretly had the answer to it. And then once we encountered the puzzle, he was able to solve it really fast. Now you might say, hey, isn't that cheating? And I don't really think so, because his character was the smartest character by far. Intelligence in D&D, and at least in 5th edition, is a very popular dump stat. So he was the only person who was smart at all in character. So it made sense for him to be the one to solve this. The purpose of this puzzle wasn't, in fact, to have a puzzle. It was to give him a role-playing moment where he could play his character to those stats and to play out that he is, in fact, the smartest character in the group. And it worked out really well. Again, you do kind of deny the other players the ability to do the puzzle, but keep in mind this is something you're doing for a purpose. It's for a reason. And you might think, well, doesn't this get really transparent? Doesn't everyone see through it? And they might. But I can say that in the example I'm thinking of, it actually worked the other way. The players sort of realized that something was up, but they didn't think, oh, the DM must have fed him the answer. What they actually assumed was that this guy, who, again, was not the most clever person at the table, they actually assumed that he was kind of slow playing his actual smarts. So they assumed that he was much smarter out of game than, as a result of reevaluating this. It was actually kind of an interesting moment, and I think it had a positive effect on the game. So this is a one way to deal with it. Now, the problem is that if people realize this, they may have sort of less regard for your puzzles. They may just kind of look around and say, okay, who do you give the answer to? This is something to do sparingly, or to do in the method where you give one person hints and still leave some puzzle for everyone else to work on as well. So that's sort of, there's some advantages, there's some disadvantages to this one. The next approach is that you can limit who solves the puzzle. And there's various ways to do that. One way to do that is to give the other people something to focus on. So that 8 intelligence barbarian, sure, he could be solving this puzzle, except he's also got to fight the monsters that are crawling out of the vents in order to, trying to attack the party while the wizard works on it. Now you've given him something to do. Or maybe the puzzle itself involves moving large blocks of stone, and so the barbarian has a role in solving the puzzle. He's got to flex his might and move the big things. And that also sort of plays into the barbarian fantasy of, I am mighty, I can move the heavy objects. So that's one option. You can also limit it to people with certain skills. This might be a puzzle that requires proficiency in religion. I used as an example in the last video the Indiana Jones and the Temple, and the Last Crusade, where he's going through and he's solving a religious puzzle. Well, that might require knowledge of religion. There might be knowledge of history or arcana required. And by that means you can limit it to your smart character, essentially. Now, if you're going to do this, you should still give the other players something to do, or something for their characters to do. So monsters to fight, some other task that they can be working on. Because if you're just giving one person the puzzle and everyone else has to sit around twiddling their thumbs, they may be less happy about this. And that's a way that things can feel a little artificial, a little unfair. So you don't want to create that sort of situation. And you might say, well, this means that a puzzle is a lot of work. I got to figure out who's going to do what, and what kind of separate things are going on. I personally believe puzzles should be used fairly sparingly, and them taking a fair bit of work to set up and to plan out is not really a big problem, because this is something that should be an occasional thing, and it's okay if occasional things take a little bit more work. That's just kind of my take on this. Now, if you're wanting to use more puzzles more heavily, this might be a bit more of an issue for you. So that's sort of my thoughts on kind of how you can approach this one. I will say none of the answers to this are really fantastic answers. There's always some downside here. but hopefully these are things that you can do that might make things a little bit simpler. Now, in the next edition, I'm going to be talking about basically the next version, or the next iteration in this, which is probably the last one, is the problem of puzzles as game stoppers, because often a puzzle can just shut your game right down, and I'll talk about ways to avoid that. If you didn't see the first part of this one, that first part is basically puzzles don't make any sense. So you can check that out as well. And given that we're talking about puzzles, I'll tell you that the Gimlet's Gold puzzle, or win Gimlet's Gold, which has a prize of a number of real silver coins, is still running. Nobody has as of yet solved it, but I'm still dropping hints. There may be a hint in here somewhere. So that's it for this one. See you next time.